some problems, but I just hit the record button. So we are recording this tonight for sure. So this teaching and discussion time will go up on the YouTube channel after I'm done. I'll upload it later tonight. So tonight we're going to talk about God's existence. And this is the question of all questions, as we just mentioned, and I'm going to bring up my little PowerPoint here, which I'll send out later, of course, as well. And God's existence impacts every area of our life, as I said last week. Just a little reminder about what I said last week, that definitely we need to understand how important the God question is, because it impacts all these areas. It impacts these 7 areas. It impacts the way we view reality. It impacts how we define knowledge. It impacts morality, ethical decisions. Give me a second here. I've got some more people coming in here as I'm trying to do 2 things at once. Just give me a second. Hold on. All right, give me a second here. Got to meet some people. This is the way it goes. Okay. All right, here we go. I'm sorry. Okay. So it definitely impacts everything. It impacts, our view of destiny, where we're going when we die, where we're headed as a human race, how we explain what's wrong with the human condition. And we look around the world, we see so many problems. We see people treating people incorrectly. We see a lot of injustice. We see a lot of things that we just shake our heads and say, wow, what is wrong with humans? And, our view of God impacts that, of course. We're going to be doing a session on the depravity of man at some point here. I have it on the schedule, because as I look around the world, if I didn't understand the depravity of man, I wouldn't be able to explain what's going on in the world around us, because it's very heartbreaking at times. And then, of course, why is there suffering, evil in the world? And so God's existence impacts all these different areas. And to say that it doesn't matter, to say that, well, it's not relevant, and I'm busy and I've got things to do and I'm making money and I've got a great family, or else I've got a cool girlfriend or boyfriend, and I've got a lot of stuff. I'm good at sports. I'm good looking. I'm not so good looking. I'm this, I'm that, whatever it is. The point is that none of those things determine God's existence. God's existence, God's still there, whether you want to stay busy and do all those things, okay? So that's what we want to talk about tonight. And then I said last week how, when you talk about the God question, it's one of those contentious topics. I mean, just like politics or, morality issues, moral issues such as abortion or same-sex marriage or whatever it is. This is it's a contentious topic, and a lot of people have debated it over the years. It's still contentious. So you need to be able to have good, carefully, well thought out arguments, or just reasons why you believe there's a God, or why you think there's a God. I'm well aware, as I said last week, that people every week when they go to church or they go to a congregational meeting, that the pastor or congregation leader opens up the Bible and everybody in that congregation, the pews, already accepts God's existence. But that's because you believe God has spoken through a text, right? And not that I don't believe that. Of course I believe that. But the point is that that's our starting point. But for some people outside of our 4 walls, they don't all agree with that. And we need to understand that, we need to have some reasons for thinking God exists without necessarily just going right to the Bible. And I'll talk about historical arguments for God at some point. I'm not going to do it tonight, but of course I believe the Bible is the Word of God and that God speaks through the Bible. So that's not what I'm debating tonight. The point is we need to be able to talk about some of the issues about God with someone that maybe doesn't accept the authority of the Bible or doesn't believe the Bible's inspired, just like we talked about Muslims who try to convert me with the Quran. I don't think the Quran's inspired. I don't think it's a revelation from God. So pulling out the Quran and trying to convert me with it is an absolute waste of time, just like the Book of Mormon. I don't accept it as an authority. So some people are in the same boat with us with the Bible. Not everybody accepts it as an authority, as we know. And so sometimes we try to use Bible verses. I mean, I'm not saying the Word of God isn't powerful. It can't convict. But the point is that sometimes, we need other things in our tool belt to pull from. We're talking about the existence of God, okay? All right. Now, give me 1 second here. Let me see one thing here. Okay, that's interesting on my... Okay, now, we definitely ran into some people least I have, of course I'm on a campus, and maybe you have as well when you're not on a campus or off a campus, that sometimes say certain things to us about God's existence. They may say, well, there's no proof for God, there's no evidence for God, or we can't know if there's a God, or that Jesus is the Son of God. That's kind of an agnostic position. And I have a picture up here of a really kind of snarky looking guy that may be looking at you saying that. Not everybody looks like that who says that, obviously, but I'm not trying to stereotype. But the point is that that's what, sometimes we hear these sayings, that, maybe there's no proof or evidence for God, or we just can't know. And one thing you always want to do with the God question is you want to always ask questions. And I always ask people clarifying questions when they say those kinds of things. I always ask, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by evidence or proof? Or what do you even mean by God when you say that I'm not sure if God exists, or there's no proof or evidence that God exists? Give me 1 second here. I got to do one quick thing here. Someone just came in here again. Make sure everybody's muted. Okay, we're good. All right, back to the screen. Sorry. Okay. And so when people ask me that, I always ask clarifying questions. That's what you always want to do. You don't always want to just jump to, a reason for belief in God, or the reason you think God exists. Just ask them questions, come back to them and make them clarify what they mean. It's so helpful. Okay. And some people, as we know, probably believe God kind of looks like the people that are biblically literate. I mean, people that don't read the Bible, and kind of the way I viewed God as a little child. Maybe some of us did. God is like a guy up in the sky with a great beard, a big gray beard, and maybe he's mad and mean looking, like the one picture here we've seen before. Of course, we know we're not supposed to make any image of God, so I'm well aware of that. I'm just giving an illustration of what people may view God, the way they view God. Sometimes they kind of have these pictures in their minds. So, sometimes you just have to ask them what they even mean by God. Okay. So now when I define God, when I say I believe there's a God, or I believe that God exists, this is the God that I'm talking about. When I say the God of the Bible, or God, I mean, I have a clear understanding of what I mean when I say God. I mean that I have a God who has moral attributes. That means we can know things about him, his moral attributes, and he have his non-moral attributes that, I think we have somebody not muted. Just a second. Who is not? Okay. Got it. Okay. And we have these moral attributes, and we have these non-moral attributes. I mean, none of us can be all-knowing, omnipresent, omniscient, all those things about God that makes him different from us. He's what we call the metaphysical attributes of God. But there are things about God, the moral attributes that we imitate, things like his holiness, his righteousness, truthfulness, love, jealousy, those kinds of things that humans tend to imitate God in some, whether to our detriment. Of course, jealousy can be a bad thing sometimes. So we know we talk about in the Bible about God's jealousy, but his mercy, things like that. So I just want to make sure that we understand when we say God exists, what we mean by God, okay? Because that's what we mean. God is a triune being. This isn't a teaching on the Trinity tonight. We can do that another time. I've got enough resources on that. I even got a clip on that from Ohio State. But the point is that we believe God is a triune being, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So that's just helpful, to clarify what you mean by God, because other people have other views of God. They may think God is an impersonal force, like Star Wars, force be with you, as you know. A lot of people say that. They believe God's in everything, like the trees and the rocks. He's one with everything. That's kind of a pantheistic view of God. And so you've got to have a good, clear understanding what you mean by God, okay? So when someone comes to me and they say, I don't know if God exists, and I'm just kind of agnostic, I just don't really know. I'm not sure if you can know. Or, I could even run into an atheist. I've talked to hundreds of atheists at Ohio State. Sometimes I have to get them to define their atheism. But the point is that a lot of people don't know how do I get knowledge of God, okay? How do I have knowledge of this being that I can't see directly? I'll explain that in a minute. How do I have knowledge of God? They don't say to me, how can I have faith in God? They say, how do I know? That's what you mean when you say, I don't know, or I know. You have knowledge, or I don't have knowledge, right? That's what that means, knowledge, from the word gnosis, okay? And so we need to really just pull back and ask them this question that I always ask. Before I go into some reasons why I think there's a God, I ask them this question. Honestly, it is so helpful every time if you just ask them this question. So for someone that says they don't know or they can't know or they're wondering how they can know there's a God, I always say to them, well, if God exists, how should he give him knowledge of himself to us? What should he do? I mean, if you're God, how would you communicate to humans? What should God do? It's very helpful because some people have never thought through it. Now, of course, you'll get some people that'll say, well, he should just appear to me. He should just appear directly, just right in front of me, like my brother sitting here at a desk right in front of me. He should just show up at a table and talk to me. Well, that problem is they don't understand who God is because they don't know what God's composed of. They don't know what kind of being they're talking about. But the point is that you just always need to ask questions. I think this is a very helpful question. And this is where I'm kind of going with this about knowledge of God. In every relationship that you have had with somebody in life, maybe, and still ongoing today, that there's some basics of how relationships are formed. And it involves communication, as you know. Everyone I've ever met in my life, every relationship I've ever had, it took initiative. I had to communicate to them. I was introduced to them. They had to communicate to me. They had to talk to me. Maybe I met in person. Maybe they emailed me. Maybe they told someone else to call them, told them to call me, or whatever it is. The point is that there had to be communication, okay? And when it comes to basics of communication, for all you communication majors out here, because I know you know more about this than I do, because I wasn't a communication major undergrad. But the point is that we have to mute that again. We have to definitely be able to communicate, and we have to be able to pick a medium to communicate with. We have to pick something, like I said, verbally or email or something. And then hopefully the person that we're communicating to receives that communication, as we know. They hopefully got the email, we said something, they responded, and that's how relationships are formed, right? Now, we know some people, with certain humans, we have communication barriers. Sometimes maybe there's bad communication, we're not listening. There's communication challenges, as we know. Maybe there's technology problems, you can't email somebody or whatever. But the point is that all relationships are formed through some kind of communication, okay? And so the reason I'm saying this is because we have to communicate to people. When we're talking about the God question, we need to ask them, what should God do to communicate to us? I mean, if God exists, he's got to pick a way to show he's real to humans or communicate something, okay? And that means just like we pick a medium, such as email or verbal talk or calling someone or whatever it is, writing something, writing a letter, writing whatever it is, God has to pick a medium as well to communicate, okay? And hopefully humans, oops, sorry about my typo there, humans should be able to receive that communication, review it, and receive it. I mean, we know biblically that people don't always pick up on God's communication. We know some of the barriers there are sin and willfulness. The will of humans don't want to receive that communication. But the point is, you see the analogy that just like we communicate as humans, God has to pick a way to communicate to us. Now, you may say, well, golly gee, that's so basic. I mean, Eric, this is nothing, I've learned nothing new so far. Well, if you're talking to somebody who doesn't believe in God or is agnostic, you need to bring this up and make them tell you what God should do to communicate to humans. Make them, put it on them and make them answer you to see, okay? Because I know what you're going to think. The next thing you're going to think is, well, hey, this kind of sounds like what we call revelation. Not the book of Revelation, but revelation. And biblically speaking, of course, revelation is at the core of biblical doctrine, that God is hidden from us, but then he decides to unveil himself to humans. He has to reveal who he is to humanity, right? He has to take the initiative because we're dead and blinded and bound to sin. And then God has to set the parameters as how he will reveal himself, okay? So it sounds very basic, but believe me, that can take you light years ahead in your conversations with people. Get them to answer how God should communicate with us. Now, another thing that comes up with people, since they don't know what God is like, and they're maybe never read the Bible, or they just don't know much what they're asking when they talk about they don't believe in God or think God exists, is that they assume that God sometimes must fit into one of these categories. He needs to be kind of like the same thing as like a table or a car or a house. And what I mean by that, they assume that everything around them, because it's physical, meaning that everything they observe on a daily basis has parts, it's put together, I can touch it, I can see it, I can verify it with my five senses, that God must be in that category. After all, I mean, he's God, and everything I see in front of me is I can see with my eyes, and I can touch it and verify the shape, size. It was made by something, it's put together as composition, materiality. So they all assume that God, some of them assume God maybe is kind of like the same kind of thing, and of course, or being. And unfortunately, that's just not the case, as we know. And so this creates a challenge for people. They're not sure how to find the existence of God. Now, we do know that, biblically speaking, that God is an immaterial and invisible being. What that means is that God is not composed of anything. He doesn't have parts. Nothing put God together. He doesn't have matter. He's not material. He's not like a table or a car. You can't measure God. He has nothing that you can quantify him with. He can't be seen directly, as we know. And so this creates, a little bit of a challenge for people, because we're dealing with a different category, a being that isn't like everything they observe on their daily lives, okay? Now, it is true that God did appear in physical form in the person of Jesus. He's the only one in the member of the Trinity that appeared in human form. Nobody's seen the Holy Spirit. Nobody's ever seen the Father. The Father has never appeared in physical form, and the Holy Spirit's never appeared in physical form. The Son is the one that took on another nature, an additional nature, and he took on human nature. So we have seen what God is like in the person of the Messiah. But that is for another time, the teaching of the Trinity. I don't have time to go over all the delicacies with that. But the point is that God definitely can take on human form, as we know. That's because we believe Jesus appeared to us as the God-man, fully percent God and fully percent human, 100% God and 100% human. So that's another topic for another time. But the point is that most people view God as, they know he is but we know God as the Father. The Father is an invisible, immaterial being, okay? And so if God's going to communicate something to us, as I said, God has to pick a medium to communicate. And so what we believe as biblical believers, as I think everyone on this call tonight is one, as far as I know. I don't know all of you personally, but I've gotten to know some of you, and I may have some new people on here. But God has decided to communicate, we believe, through the natural world and through the world of history. And so God has picked some ways to communicate to us. And that means that people can look at the world of nature, and they should be able to know there's a God through looking at the natural world. That means they do not need the Bible to know there is a creator. If they want to know more about the creator and his intentions for humanity, yes, they will need the Bible. But the point is that for a guy on an island somewhere, someone that is biblically illiterate, like I was growing up, I already believed in a creator, and I didn't have to read the Bible to know there was a creator. I already knew there was a creator just by looking at the world of nature, walking down the street in my neighborhood. I looked up at the sky and looked at, it just bore witness to me. The creation bore witness to me. I didn't need to read about the Bible or read the Bible to know there was a creator. And that's what we call the light of creation, the light in the natural world, that God does that. He does reveal himself to the world through the world of nature. Now I'll expand on that in a minute. But then, as I said, if you want to know what God is like in a greater way, you want to know what his plans are for humanity. You want to know this God, what's he like? Is he caring? Is he moral? Is he holy? Does he judge? Is he personal? Then yes, you're going to need definitely need the Bible. You're going to need a greater picture of who God is by reading the Bible. And that's what we believe. It's based on what we call authoritarianism, that God has revealed himself through a text, and the text is an authority to humanity because God is an authority to us, and he's picked a text to communicate, okay? So let's expand on this. So when Paul says in Romans 1 that God's existence can be clearly seen through the things that have been shown to the unbelieving world, through the things that are made, as I said before, people do not need to read Romans 1, as I'll say in a minute. People don't need to read Romans 1 to know there's a God. You can look at the things that have been made in this world, meaning features of the natural world, and know that there is a God. Okay, you should be able to infer or know directly there is a God. Some people make an inference, they'll see something in the world and they'll say, well, I infer there must be a God because look at that feature of reality. Other people will say, well, I just know there's a God. I don't infer it, I just know it directly, like God exists. You know what I mean? And sometimes those things are related to each other, but that we get into philosophical issues there. But the point is that I didn't need to read Romans 1 growing up, and I never read the book of Romans before I was a believer at age 24. I didn't need to read Romans 1 to know that the natural world showed that there is some sort of God. I mean, showed that there's a God in the features of reality, the natural world. So the point is that no, I did not need to read the Bible, where it talks about it creating Romans 1, and most people don't. God has revealed himself to all humans in this world through the gift of the created order, and that's what we mean by someone is not muted. I will mute them now. That's fixed. Okay, back to screen. All right. And so some people, obviously, like I said, believed in God as a creator before they believed in Jesus. You know what I mean? Or some people obviously maybe didn't believe in God at all and they heard the gospel directly and that's all it took and they came to believe in a God because of what they heard about Jesus. It just depends on the person. I just know for me, I did not need to hear about the gospel to believe there was a God to begin with. I already believed in God through the gift of creation that I could see in the natural world. So anyway, okay, so let's move on here. Now, so let's go back to this verse here. Even though as I said, someone does not need to read this to know there's a God. Let's say they're looking around, they're just observing the natural world or trying to figure out if there's a God, without using the Bible. And, they're just trying to figure that out. And the point is that they can by looking around the things that have been made, the features of reality in the natural world. So one thing that we need to realize is that needs an explanation just by looking at anything is this existence itself. You may say to yourself, well, hey, we just exist, I mean, hey, I exist, I get up, I do my job every day, I raise my kids, all that stuff. And many people live their lives that way. As we know, they don't think about existence. They don't think about why is there anything at all. I mean, but the point is that if we're talking to people about God, we should be able to bring up the issue of existence. This is a great book, Why Is There Anything at All? And because we're answering the why questions as I'm talking about here. And let's see, Vi's here. Let me mute her. This is what happens when people come in late. Sorry, I'm doing the best I can to shift back and forth. But the point is a mystery of existence, okay? So let me mention something here. There's something we call the principle of sufficient reason. You may say to yourself, well, what is that? Well, the principle of sufficient reason says that everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature and an external cause. So you may say, well, that sounds really philosophical and really heady, and I don't get it. Well, let me use an illustration here. So let's say you're walking down the street and next to a museum and you see this giant red ball sitting there, giant ball. And I'm with my friend, Brad. And I say to Brad, wow, like that ball, that's pretty, wow, look at that. That's pretty amazing. I just guess it's there. Hey, let's just keep walking. I would venture to say that most of us, if we saw something like that, would say to ourselves, how did that ball get there? What in the world is that doing there, right? Why does that ball have a purpose? Like, what's it doing there and how did it get there? I mean, I doubt you would just say, well, I guess it just popped into existence and it just ended up there and that's just the way it is. I think most of us would ponder, where that ball came from. And of course, what I just said was, in the principle of sufficient reason, that means that everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in a necessity of its own nature and external cause. So I would venture to say that most of us would assume that that ball has an external cause, meaning that something caused that ball to be there, whether, we had 20 guys pull in with a truck and loaded it there, or, somebody rolled it up the stairs or whatever. The point is that it was put there by somebody else, but it needs a reason for its existence. It definitely has a reason behind it, right? It didn't just pop in there out of nowhere and it just exists, right? And so if we use that analogy, if you're thinking about the universe, think about the universe as we believe now, what we know about cosmology. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. No, I mean, nothing is nothing. I know you can't imagine it. It's hard to think about it because we don't live in the world of nothing. We live in the world of something. Something is around us all the time. There's about 120 things in my basement now I'm looking at, 120 somethings that is around me. There's nothing, I can't even look at, there's no nothing. Nothing doesn't exist because everything's something, okay? But when it comes to the beginning of the universe, remember that there was a beginning point, okay? And as much as it's hard to fathom or comprehend, before that beginning point, there was nothing. Nothing is nothing. No time, no space, no matter, no natural laws, no other universes, nothing. And we know through the cosmological evidence that came in several decades ago, the universe now had a beginning point, okay? Now, I know there's many debates about this, whether there was a quantum fluctuation or whether there was, some other explanation for what was before the beginning point. Was there something? But the best cosmological evidence we have is that definitely that there was a beginning point now, and time, space, and matter came into existence at that beginning point. So if you use the analogy with the ball, the red ball, you probably might say to yourself, well, hey, the universe is there. It's awfully large, as we know. And if any of you have looked through a telescope or done any studies in that area, you know that it's beyond, it goes on and on. I mean, it's enormous. It's amazing. But most of the time, intuitively, we would say to ourselves, did that universe just pop into existence on its own? If it had a beginning, what caused it? I mean, did anything cause it, or the universe just managed to self-create itself? Did it come into existence on its own? Did it, or else was there a cause outside of the universe that caused the universe? Was it a personal cause? Was it a impersonal cause? What was it? Okay. And so the universe definitely had a beginning. That's not really debated anymore. The debate is over the cause. Now, of course, we know biblically speaking that that we believe in the beginning, it says God created. And when that evidence came in, that the evidence came in for the beginning of the universe, a lot of physicists were mad because they said, well, gee, this sounds like Genesis 1. It sounds like in the beginning God created, and they weren't too happy when the cosmological evidence came in that the universe did have a beginning. It's kind of interesting that a lot of the first scientists, these guys that are smarter than I'll ever be, all believe that God was the one who started off the universe. They believed God was the one who put the laws of nature into existence. And they kind of ended up giving birth to modern science. Not all of them were Christian theists or biblical theists. Some of them were deists. But the point is that they believed in, some sort of God, or, deistic God, or a God that put the universe into existence, and it had an orderly fashion to it, and it was rational, and science could begin, because science obviously won't work in a chaotic universe. It has to be orderly, it has to be rational. So a lot of these guys made a lot of contributions to the field of science. I don't have time to go into it, but it's interesting they all believe that God was the one who was the author of the beginning point of science, because you don't have any science till the beginning of the universe. You can't do science because there's no laws of nature at all, period. And you can't do science without the laws of nature. So that's kind of interesting. So the point is that what I'm getting to is that we have to be able to start talking about, whether there's a God. You can do this without using the Bible. Now, also, there's something what we call is the efficient cause. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this. You see it all the time around you. You see efficient causes. An efficient cause is something like, example, like if a ball breaks up, if my son's baseball broke a window, you would say the ball is the efficient cause of the window breaking, okay? So every change around you is caused by an efficient cause. You may say, well, I don't really use that language, but you do see it all around you. You see efficient causes everywhere. So let me give you an example. You must, when it comes to the beginning of the universe, you would need something to set it off. You would need a first cause or an efficient cause, something that caused a change to begin, okay? You need something that itself would have no cause and that caused everything else, because everything in the universe, as far as we go on, the universe into humanity, into this world, is dependent on something else. We live in a contingent world. Contingent means dependent, okay? And we need a first cause that would start off everything that can't be dependent on anything else, because if something was dependent on something else, we would have an infinite regress and none of us would be here. Just go on and on and on, just like the first domino. If you use that analogy with the universe, you need something that is uncaused, something that can't be impacted by anything else, not dependent on anything else. Otherwise, we would not be here talking right now, because everything in the universe is dependent, as we know. Another analogy is kind of like your building blocks. When you guys were little, you'd use, at least, or maybe you still do, some of you still play with building blocks. I don't know. It's kind of a fun game, right, at age 51. But the point is that you have to have that block on the bottom there that can't be really moved. There's that block really has to be the one that holds up everything else. It can't be dependent on anything else. You need that first block, okay? You can knock all the other blocks off, but all those other blocks are dependent on each other, right? It's like a chain. But you need that one block at the start that has not dependent on anything, okay? It's the one that holds up everything else, okay? And so just like that, just like I go back to the prime mover, you need a first cause that isn't dependent on anything to get the universe going, because everything we have now is a chain of cause and effect, okay? So you need something outside of that to start everything off. And that, now what we mean by that is that in theology, there's something we call a necessary being, okay? So when we say God is a necessary being, we believe God is not dependent on anything else. He's not contingent on anything, okay? He is, in his own nature, not dependent, okay? The nature of God, who he is, he's not dependent on anything. You and I and everything else in this world is dependent on something else, but God is not dependent, okay? He's a necessary being. He necessarily exists, okay? And so this is something we call God's, similar to what we call God's aseity. You may say, that word's not in the Bible, but all that means is that God is not dependent on anything outside of himself, and he's totally sufficient in who he is, okay? It's from the aseity, the term Latin, it's a Latin phrase, meaning ase means from or by himself. So we would need to go back here, you would need a necessary being outside of the universe who would get the universe going. You need some sort of prime mover or first cause that is not dependent on anything else, okay? And so existence, like I said, if you can talk about a few of these things with existence and the universe, very important. But this next argument may be even more easier to understand. There's something we also called final causation. And you may say, what's a final cause? Well, you guys use final causation every day because you choose a goal and you have end goals, and then you take the steps to achieve it. You may say to yourself, well, give me some illustrations. I will in a minute. But there's something we call, some of you are probably familiar with, it's called the teleological argument. And that means that certain things in the natural world look like they have a purpose or goal. They're going towards a certain specific goal or end goal. So they look like they're designed. I mean, you look at something and you say, well, that looks like it has a goal behind it. It looks like it's designed for a purpose. Let me give you an example right here, that if you look at Mount Rushmore, you obviously know that that has a purpose. It has a goal. The end goal is that those faces are carved, and of course they display those four figures as you know who they are, and people can look at them and they remind them of who those four figures are, and they're a national monument in the United States, which hopefully won't be spray painted at some point. But then you have over here on the right, you have like the Grand Canyon. That's just the result of natural causes. That means that there is no specific design behind it. It's not, it doesn't really look like, I mean, I'm sure the Grand Canyon, is there, but I'm saying that you can tell the difference that that is not the same thing as Mount Rushmore, okay? So you look around the world, you see things that are designed for a purpose, okay? It looks like that has an end goal, a purpose in mind. And when you guys make decisions, when you plan your life, you make decisions to plan. You plan your life out because you want it to be a success. You all have end goals. You plan your health, you plan your education, you try to plan your retirement. You have short-term, long-term goals. Governments have to plan way ahead, 20 years out, 30 years out, 5 years out, even a month out. Of course, they don't do the best job sometimes. Not an easy thing. Businesses plan ahead, but there's so much planning all around you to be a success. And everybody has to plan with an end goal in mind. So if that's the case that we plan as humans and we're intelligent beings, what about the universe? What about the universe? Is the universe planned out? Was it made for a purpose or a reason? And this leads to something that we call the fine-tuning argument that's been pretty well known for a while now. But this is the view that the universe looks like that it was planned out for life to exist on Earth, that the universe is kind of like a biosphere, that it has to be planned out a certain way for us to even be talking right now. Think about the planning it takes in your life to be a success. Multiply that by the kind of universe you'd have to plan out to get life going on Earth, the conditions that must be in place. Because you need a kind of universe that would allow life to begin, would allow the property of organisms can take in food and grow and adapt and reproduce and everything. You would have to have the right kind of universe to have the right kind of Earth. And without the right kind of Earth, you can't get life going. And therefore, when people bring up evolution to you, remember, they're generally talking about biological evolution, which they learn in college. But you can't get to biological evolution until you have the right universe, the right planet, and you show how life can come from non-life, which those three things have to be in place to begin with before you get any of the biological evolution, okay? So the fine-tuning argument has been written about quite a bit. There's some books here, some suggestions if you want to go deeper on it. The one, A Fortunate Universe, in the middle here is very good, written by Luke Barnes in the middle there, the white book, but they're all good. The Elegant Universe isn't necessarily written by a believer, but he still makes some points in there that are worth reading. But the point is that there's not a lot of debate that the universe is fine-tuned as we know it, and I'll define fine-tuning in a minute. But even these guys right here, these are physicists who don't even necessarily believe in God, but they all believe that the universe looks like it's set up for life, including the late Stephen Hawking, who died last year or the year before. All believe the universe is definitely, looks like that it has been set up for life. I mean, it's planned out in some way. Now, they don't agree what's behind the planning. They don't agree necessarily whether God did it, but the point is that they definitely believe the universe is fine-tuned, okay? Look at this guy right here, Paul Davies. He's not even a Christian. He teaches at Arizona State. He's a physicist. Look what he says. I have his book, The Goldilocks Enigma. He says, scientists are slowly waking up to an inconvenient truth. The universe looks suspiciously like a fix. This issue concerns the very laws of nature themselves. For 40 years, physicists and cosmologists have been quietly collecting examples of an all too convenient coincidences and special features in the underlying laws of the universe that seem to be necessary in order for life, and hence conscious beings to exist. Change any one of them and the consequences would be lethal. Interesting quote from a guy that isn't even a Christian. I think he's some sort of deist at best. You have a guy here, another guy, Charles Towns. He's a physicist. I don't know if he's a Christian either, but he says here, intelligent design, as one sees it from a scientific point of view, seems to be quite real. This is a very special universe. It's remarkable that it came out just this way. If the laws of physics weren't just the way they are, we couldn't be here at all. The sun couldn't be here. The laws of gravity, nuclear laws, and magnetic theory, quantum mechanics, and so on have to be just the way they are for us to be here. I maintain that science is closely related to that because science tries to understand how the universe is constructed and why it does what it does, including human life. And you can read that article there at that link I have right here. And so, you know, it's kind of interesting, you know, that these guys all agree the universe is fine-tuned. I mean, it's set up for life. And why does it need to be set up for life? As I said, why would the universe need to be planned out? Well, as I said, if you're God and you want to plan out a universe, you have to have a certain kind of universe set up for us to be here. That means that you want sentient, self-aware, reasoning, personal creatures to exist. So you have got to plan that out way ahead of time. It takes some serious planning, way more than you and I plan every day or our lives out, right? And our Earth is rare. Now, there's a book called Rare Earth, Why Complex Life is Uncommon in the Universe. Sometimes you'll see articles online that say they found other Earth-like planets. Sometimes you'll see that. You can read the article, Why Scientists Haven't Found Earth 2.0 Yet. That was back in December 2018. It's kind of really dishonest just to come out with an article saying we have found a planet just like Earth. They don't know that. And as far as we know, there are no potentially Earth-like worlds around sun-like stars. There's so many factors that have to be in place to even get life going. You have to have the carbon right. You have to have everything right. So you can get that book called Rare Earth. But the point is that don't be duped and just read some article online where someone says, well, we found a lot of other planets just like Earth. You know, Earth isn't special at all. Well, it is different and it is special, okay? And so the argument kind of goes like this, the way you kind of wrap up the fine-tuning argument, it goes like this. So advanced planning is a sign of an intelligent cause. There are features of reality that show advanced planning with an end goal in mind. Therefore, advanced planning points to intelligent mind. And so that is one way to talk about God's existence, that you can talk about how the universe seems to be planned for us to be here. And we plan as humans all the time. We look ahead, we have goals, end goals. You know, we plan our lives out. Just think of the complexity of the universe, what kind of universe it would take to pull that off, to have an Earth-like planet that we have and have life to get going, okay? So that's an example, and that's something else you can talk about if you weren't able to use the Bible, okay? That's something you can bring up. Now, this is what some people believe. Obviously, this is kind of taught on college campuses. This is more of a general overview of what people might believe if there's no God. You know, I'm not trying to put words in people's mouths, but if there's no God, this is kind of what we would arrive at as how we got here. Some people might say, well, you know, we're just one universe among many universes. The laws of physics arose by chance from a multitude of possible other universes. We're just one that got lucky. Our universe got lucky. The first forms of life developed by chance, arising by primordial soup combinations that resulted from the laws of physics plus accidents. And then the first concept of life developed by chance through genetic mutations and environmental randomness, and humans evolved by more improbable occurrences. And I've used this chart with people. I've used this slide with students. I've showed it to them and asked them if this is what they believe about where they came from. It's kind of bleak, not a lot of hope in it. But most importantly, the question is if there's evidence for it. And as far as we know, there's not an overwhelming amount of evidence that shows this is really the points to this as being strongly, points to this as being true. And if anything, the evidence seems to go in the opposite direction, that there seems to be a mind behind the laws of physics, and there seems to be a mind behind how life got going, and there seems to be a mind behind the first life. So chance isn't even a cause. Chance doesn't do anything. It's just a mathematical probability of something happening without a designer behind it or a mind behind it. But some people, think this is true, but you can challenge them on that if you want to. But obviously you can print this slide and show it to them if they're interested. Ask them if they believe it. But remember, there's different kinds of explanations, okay? So when someone says to you, well, science has kind of explained away God, or science can show that there's no God, that's not true. You have to get them to define science, because science only studies the natural world. It studies impersonal objects and the laws of nature. It doesn't really deal with any kind of personal or agent explanations. God is, by definition, outside of the natural world anyway. And so to say science can disprove God when it's set up not even to find God necessarily is kind of dishonest, okay? So there's different kinds of explanations to reality. We just looked at an agent explanation or personal explanation behind the universe. There seems to be a motive, a will, an intention. There seems to be a purpose behind the universe, that it's here for a reason. It's there for us to be here, for life to get going. And that involves agency, a person or a being that planned ahead, right? Just like we are personal agents, okay? Now, there's another argument that we can talk about when we talk about teleological arguments or design arguments. It's something called the information theory argument. You can get these books if you want to go deeper on it. Stephen Meyer was the main guy that wrote on this, but there's another guy named Thomas Woodward that's on the far corner there. I had him come to High State. I can't afford Stephen Meyer, unfortunately, but maybe one day he can come to High State. But the point is that you can go deeper on this because I'm just going to give a little summary of how this argument works. So the deal is that with the information theory argument is that computers, and just like everything you buy, comes with a set of instructions, okay? As you know, computers perform a specific job. They perform calculations, they store information, they retrieve data, process information. And of course, you know, computers are programmed by programmers. So some of you on here might be a computer programmer and you know this. But the point is the instructions for the computer were written before the computer, right? And so the information for that instruction manual came from a mind. That means it came from the mind of a programmer, okay? And so when you kind of use that analogy for DNA, there are about 2.5 billion cells in one of your hands. They're also very tiny. Of course, our cells are told what to do, but not by a person or by a computer. Our cells are told what to do by DNA. DNA is the instruction manual that tells the cell what to do, okay? And so if you use the analogy but with the computer as an instruction manual that came from a mind, you would have to think the instruction manual that builds cells and tells cells what to do would most likely come from an intelligent source as well. And then you have these letters here that have to be in a certain sequence that encodes the information into digital form. And so your living cell, of course, has to be able to encode functional proteins. And to be functional, the proteins have to have a very specific sequence, just like we see in these letters here. All these letters, if you go online, you look at the lettering sequence for your DNA, you can see all these. I can't go over in detail what each letter is. That's for another time. But the point is that whatever the information, just like the information that comes from a computer programmer, this information, DNA, is similar, that it's the information, the instruction manual that builds a cell. And we know that most instruction manuals, as a matter of fact, all of them come from a mind, okay? An intelligent source. And so to say your DNA or the DNA came from a impersonal cause or a impersonal force that has no mind behind it, that it just arose through chance and time, is really challenging because, like I said, if that sequence isn't right, you can't get functional proteins. And as I said with the analogy with the computer program, it is an instruction manual. As I said, I don't know any instruction manuals that come from a natural cause that just pop into existence on their own, or write out the sequence, or write out the something just writes out the manual without a mind behind it. So that's something like an analogy you can use with the information theory argument, but it's a very interesting debate, a very interesting argument. You can look up some of Stephen Meyer's videos right here as I had online. He's debated on it. He's responded to arguments. He even wrote a book, a sequel to Signature in the Cell. You can read about he deals with the arguments there, the arguments against it. He knows what the counter arguments are. He's well aware of them, so you can read about those. But anyway, so that's something else you can talk about. But there's something else you can talk about without the Bible with people, and that is the issue of a moral law. Now, Paul talks about this in Romans 2, no doubt. He says the moral law is written in people's hearts. There's actually Gentiles have the moral law. Jewish people have the written law. They have the Torah, but we Gentiles are not given the Torah. Israel was. But we have the moral law written in our hearts, okay? Now, you don't need the Bible to know there is a moral law. Okay, you do not need the Bible to know there is a moral law. Even C.S. Lewis said that when he studied different cultures and he wrote the book, The Abolition of Man, he noticed that there seems to be a common morality that transcends all cultures, that every culture had a concept of murder, things such as certain behaviors, prohibitions, the way to treat people, mutual obligations, that seemed to bear witness to a moral law that transcended everything. It just transcended cultures. And Lewis wrote about that, as I said in his book, The Abolition of Man. Now, I do know that when talking to people these days, that everybody will say these things to me. As you obviously know, our culture is absolutely immersed right now in a war over what's just and unjust. We're burning down cities, we're killing people, we're protesting, we're having riots, we're destroying businesses because we don't agree on what's fair, or we seem to believe there's some sort of unfair treatment. We believe there's a lack of justice. We want something that's morally right, what we think is morally right. We make these complaints all the time. We say, that's not fair. We say, I want justice. That's evil. That's not right. That's morally wrong, or what the heck is wrong with people? So it just seems to me that everywhere I go, even people who don't read the Bible seem to complain. They all seem to know there's a difference between what is fair and unfair. They all seem to know what is just and unjust. They seem to have something they're appealing to. They seem to have an issue with knowing what is morally right and morally wrong. And they seem to know the difference between what is evil and good. Now, that means that there seems to be some moral law in action around them that they're either not realizing is there, or else maybe they're appealing to, and maybe they do know they're appealing to, but the point is that there seems to be a moral law or standard they're appealing to, because they're saying there's a standard that's being violated, okay? They're saying that there's something wrong here. There's a standard that I believe in that's being violated. And that's why you need to ask people about this. Where is the standard coming from that you're appealing to, this moral standard coming from? Is there some sort of authority around you that's being violated? Is there an authority or something that has a right to impose a standard? Where does this standard come from? And so what I always do, as I just did today, by the way, is that, you can always ask them, does this standard that you're appealing to come from society itself? Is there some sort of societal standard that's being violated? Is some sort of cultural standards being violated? Does it come from yourself? Like, do you make your own standard up? Do you have a source of injustice and just? What's just and unjust? It comes from you and within. Did you invent something yourself? Or is there a transcendent creator that has given us an idea of what is just and unjust, that's given us a moral law that's being violated? Maybe you're appealing to a moral law that's already there that's being violated. C.S. Lewis once said that I couldn't make sense of injustice unless I knew what just was. And then I realized there had to be a source for that just and unjust. And that was a moral law that he realized that was out there. It was in the universe, already written in the fabric of the universe that he was appealing to. Now, I would say that most people maybe have not thought about this. When I challenged two protesters this summer, they had a sign, I think I talked about this, they had a sign that said justice. And I walked up to them and said, where's your source of justice or injustice come from? And they said, well, society. And I said, well, which society? Well, American society. Okay, well, would you agree that not everybody agrees on what's just and unjust in American society? And they said, well, yeah, that's why we're debating it. And I said, right. And then I said, why do you think people matter? I mean, you're fighting for people, right? I mean, you think people, and they're like, well, because I think people matter. That's what they said. I'm like, no. I said, why? They said, well, everybody thinks people matter. I said, why do people matter? That's not answering the question. And where's your sense of moral obligation come from? You have a moral obligation to do this. They didn't know that either. So the point is that these things impact our everyday lives, morality and the moral law. Everybody has what is called moral values. That means that things such as love, justice, mercy, those are your moral values, or other, you may have some other values in there. Those are things that motivate your behavior, okay? And then, of course, you have moral duties. That means that you think you have a duty to behave a certain way. You shouldn't do that, or you ought to do this, or not ought to do that, okay? Those are your moral obligations or moral duties. And of course, you probably believe in moral accountability, meaning that, you believe people need to be held morally accountable. So everybody's ethical system involves these three issues, okay? The question is, can you ground these things without God? Can you ground these things based on society? Can society come up with these things? If so, which society? What about German society? Remember the Nazis when they were being prosecuted in the Nazi war crimes? They said, we are just going by the dictates of our culture, and you can't prosecute us because this is all we know. This is German society. Well, then the judge got up and said, no, there's a law above you that's judging. There's a moral law that transcends all cultures that is judging you on this issue, and you're wrong and you need to be prosecuted. So just because society comes up with their own moral code doesn't mean you'd have to have a law above that society to judge it. Otherwise, it would just be one society against the next. You couldn't say one was wrong or the other one was right unless you had a moral law to judge it by. And as I said, your moral your morality and your ethics or your ethical system is influenced by your view of people. If you're going to fight for people and fight for rights and fight for dignity and fight for value, can you please explain to me why people matter to you? Give me a reason. Well, they just do. We just know they do. That is not an answer. That's circular. I want you to tell me why you're fighting so hard for people. Why are people so important? In my worldview, in the biblical worldview, everybody's created in the image and likeness of God. Everybody has the same equal treatment. There's no discrimination. God created different ethnicities, of course, but everybody's equal. Everyone has the same right, dignity, value. God bestows that on humans. It's intrinsic. Government can't take that away. You can't take it away. Humans can't take it away. It's been bestowed on us from God. But why do you think people have value and dignity and rights? Why do you fight for that? You must think people matter, but why are people so valuable? And furthermore, you can ask them this: why do you say you want a world of justice, fairness, and equality? It seems to me you know the kind of world you want, but where do you get that from? How do you know what kind of world you want unless there's a standard to measure it by? You must know what kind of world you want because you must know what kind of world you don't want. But you can't have that without some sort of standard outside yourself to appeal to. Otherwise, it's just your opinion. I might say I want a world with A, B, C, D, and E, and then Joe might come along and say, I want a world with A, B, C, D, E, and F, whatever. The point is that you know there's some sort of standard you have to appeal to, okay? And I think without God, you're going to have a hard time finding any kind of objective standard or anything outside yourself, because, like I said, you keep appealing to something here, some kind of standard that is being violated. Okay, so the question becomes: did a non-moral process get us to where we are? I mean, people say that there was a Big Bang, and that's a non-moral process, no mind behind it. And then we have neo-Darwinism, which is a non-moral process, nothing behind, no mind behind that. It's just blind, undirected, no God behind it, no mind. And then life gets going with no moral process behind it. There's no thinking, no mind behind it at all. So are you trying to tell me that a non-God view, a neo-Darwinian account, can account for all this stuff? Moral values, moral duties. Some will try to come up with their own system. I know that. I've dealt with it. But the point is that I would say that God is a much better explanation as a transcendent source for why people matter, why humans have equality, dignity, and value, why we have objective moral values and duties, and why we even have free will, that we're free to make our own choices, okay? So those are some of the things you can mention those things as well without even opening up the Bible. Now, I did say that we are created in God's image, so that's true. You would need Genesis to talk about that. But I wouldn't say just to talk about morality generally on this issue, like back here. I don't think you can appeal to the moral law outside the Bible, talk about God there. Now, as I said before, I've talked about this, everybody can see the same things in reality. They can observe some of the same things, okay? The question becomes, what explains it better? You look at some of these things right here. On the right side is the view we believe in, the theistic view, and the other side is what we call naturalistic view, meaning there's no God or nature is all there is. And you can just compare them, what makes more sense of reality. Did everything we know come by chance that has no ultimate purpose? On this side right here, the no God side, is man the product of impersonal matter plus time and chance? Is morality defined by each individual? You just make up your own morality. So you can kind of compare these two. I show this chart to students all the time, and it's a way to get them to think about God, the God question, because they can see these same things I see. The question is what explains them, okay? And then one other thing that comes up, remember that not everybody thinks about the God question based on those things I just mentioned. Some people begin to think about God because of existential needs in their life. That means that they have these desires, these emotional needs. And that means that it's not necessarily based on any kind of, some people, the way they're wired, logical and reasoned arguments aren't necessarily the direction they go, and they go for more on the emotional side of things. And these books talk about that. You can get these books right here. But the point is that everybody seems to have the need for purpose and love and goodness and, these existential needs. They want to feel security, they want meaning, they want goodness, all these things. And this is what these books talk about. The question becomes, why are these desires there in humans? And did God plant them there? Are they planted originally from God to begin with? Did he give these existential needs to humans? And we just begin to unearth them as life goes on. You say to yourself, I need purpose, I need meaning, I need love, I need this, I need that. I have these needs. And the question becomes whether we kind of create them ourselves, or did God put those there to begin with? Of course, I would venture on the side that God is the one who put those needs there. And then we end up finding that he meets those needs more than anything else in life, because we know that humans can meet some of those needs, but we know ultimately God is the one who meets all those needs perfectly. So those books talk about that there. You can read some of those books if you want to. But remember, I haven't even, as we talked about some of these things, I haven't even mentioned anything about history. I haven't talked about prophecy. I haven't talked about Israel. I haven't talked about Jesus. I haven't talked about the resurrection. I haven't talked about the argument from history. I haven't talked about, there's other arguments I could talk about, things about God I talk about without the Bible. There's the argument for consciousness. There's other things. But the point is that these are some of the things you have to be able to navigate through with people if you're going to talk about the God question, okay? And if you're going to ask me, what my ultimate thing when I talk about with people without the Bible, I just say, I think God is the best explanation for reality, the things I observe in reality. There's more things that are even on this chart, that there's so many features of reality that I can look in the natural world, look around, that I think God is a better explanation than nature on its own, all by itself, without any mind behind it, nature just accounting for those things, because that's what that means, naturalistic, right? It means nature alone, no God, right? Nature by itself accounting for everything. No mind, no intelligence, no God. Okay? And that's something that I don't think is very plausible. I look around and look at those things. Just like when I showed you this picture here, this is a naturalistic view of how we got here. No God involved, right? We got here through chance and time, and we're just here. We make the most of it, and that's what some people think. So having said that, I get the feeling there's going to be a lot of discussion here, so let's talk. I'm going to unmute you all, and I can go back to slides if you want, and we'll go from there. Let's unmute. Okay. How about that? I unmuted you. Isn't that exciting? Okay. Now, so shoot away. Who wants to discuss something? Go for it. And like I said, all questions are on the board. We're not going to be, judging each other. Someone, oh, that's a dumb question. Don't say that. This may be all new to you. Some people may be a repeat. I don't know. I don't know you all. But go for it. If you want to ask a question, we can talk about it. I can bring up the slide again, too. It's 8:10. We got plenty of time. Go ahead. Anybody?
Dave Koltik here.
Yes, sir.
And I'm new, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Sure. How'd you find out about it, Dave?
Through your email, and I've listened constantly to the Messianic on One Place, and so I think that's how you got my email.
That reminds me, can I say something real quick before you ask your question? I'm sorry, you got plenty of time. One thing I want to mention about this discussion tonight is that Jewish people, I mentioned this last week, many Jewish people don't believe in God. Most of the Jewish people I talk to in this day and age don't even believe in God. So this discussion tonight is very relevant if you're talking to secular Jewish people. Okay? I deal with them all the time because that's my primary audience. I don't deal with many Jewish people that believe in God anymore. So just want to throw that out there. Go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say something about the universe and Brian Greene, for example, always throws the multiverse at you.
Right.
And so I got to talk with him for a little bit about that concept, but he says you can't be other than agnostic because you can't know. And so he believes in probability. As soon as you say that, he has to go to probability. But I find arguing with those people is he originally thought that the multiverse, because he was in string theory, would have less parameters than our universe. So our universe, which is our visible universe, has about 10 to the 80th particles in it. And now string theory is requiring 10 to the 120 universes. So it's kind of anti-scientific to come back with this multiverse argument. In other words, our universe is not unique. There's 10 to the 120 of them, and we just happen to be in this one.
Right.
And so, but my counter to him was, well, science, if you're going to explain things, has to reduce the number of parameters. So our universe so to explain 10 to the 80th particles, you need 10 to the 120th universes. So that's anti-scientific. So you failed in your argument to explain that God didn't create this universe. You needed more parameters to describe it, and therefore that's a failure.
I would agree. And if you watch our video, I can send out the link tonight when I get him. I had Michael Strauss come to Ohio State. You know who Michael Strauss is?
No, I don't know him.
Yeah, he's a physicist. He worked on the collider.
Okay.
He teaches at, I think, Oklahoma State or University of Oklahoma. He's is he a particle physicist? I'm trying to remember, or theoretical physicist.
Be a particle physicist.
Yeah, he came to Ohio State. I had him lecture there 4 years ago, and I had his videotaped. But I'll send out the link of him lecturing, but he shut down the multi-universe theory right away. You know, I mean, we don't have any evidence of any other universes really.
Exactly.
It's speculative, and it does make it more complicated. You're adding on, it's Occam's razor, you're making it more complicated by adding on necessities you don't really need to. And then the other thing is, my question is, like, I had this slide up here. Let me show you this slide. Why is it that these guys, well, Brian's on here. Green is on here. They all agree the universe is fine-tuned, but it just seems like they can't agree, you know, on the cause. You know, they simply debate. They kind of get around the God explanation with, well, maybe there's other universes, or blah, 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 or this or that, you know. But it's amazing how many of them all agree the universe definitely is fine-tuned, right? They're not disagreeing about that.
It's used all the time in discussions, and but they want to rebel against God, and they don't want to acknowledge God. So they're forced into these probability arguments. Just as you said, everything's probable. And
right. Well,
when you calculate the probability, it's so unlikely that, in other words, what's the probability that we're in this 1 in 10 to the 20th universes? They just say, well, we just got lucky. Well, that's very, very lucky. And then when you brought up the argument of the DNA again, how do you organize all of that in this very special way, and then have it work? That's very, so there's so many improbabilities. Not only is our universe improbable, the fact that the DNA is improbable. When you add all this up, it's mind-boggling how improbable it is.
Well, but look at this illustration here, like the slide I used here. Just it's a generalization, I know, but the people believe this. I mean, they act like chance is some sort of cause. You know, exactly. Chance doesn't do anything. Chance is just a mathematical probability, as you said. And then they think they've gotten away with an explanation. Oh, you know, well, chance events happen. Well, yeah, chance events do happen. I mean, you know, I can predict the probability of me flipping a coin of how many times it'll, you know, be heads or tails. But I'm the one that's doing the flipping. Chance doesn't do anything, right? Chance doesn't have any power to do anything. And so, you know, they act like, even if God used a chance event, you know, you can't really sometimes say that God isn't behind the intersection of a chance event. But the point is that it cracks me up the way they throw chance around, you know, like it's just some sort of cause. Dawkins does it.
This question, this is a question about miracles, because they would argue that you're going to argue for miracles. And how does that compare with the argument for chance? So they're going to cubbyhole you in a similar way with, you're going to say God has miracles.
Well, miracles, you mean because miracles are defined as rare events, like singularities or one-time
Unexplained
events?
scientific events.
Oh,
So,
well, see, that's the whole problem is that these guys, they're so constrained by their scientism, you know, where everything has a scientific explanation and you can't get out of the scientific box, that, you know, they think that it's just so silly to try to say that science can explain away God when the whole method of science is methodological naturalism, which are not even allowed to look for any non-natural causes. And so they already rule it out. So what I find guys like, if Brian, I don't want to say anything about Brian Greene because I don't know him, but I mean, you've talked to him, whatever. But these guys, that what they do is they confuse philosophy and science. They start out with their metaphysical positions where they say nature is all there is. We know the natural world is all there is. Well, that's a metaphysical claim. That's not a scientific claim. And then they take science, or the study of the natural world as it is, and they try to use science to back up their philosophy. They've already done philosophy to begin with, and now they're using science to try to affirm their philosophy. I'm like, well, which is it? I mean, they're really doing philosophy most of the time. You know what I mean? And they don't see it. So they've already presupposed there's no God to begin with, and so miracles are out of the,
it's Donald Trump Jr. here, and I'll get right.
Oh, someone's got Donald Trump Jr. on. Okay. But the point is that, Dave, you're right, that they just overshoot with their scientific limitations. I'm not against scientific explanations, but they're never going to allow anything else in the picture with that model, right? I mean, God's already excluded to begin with, and that's what the whole intelligent design debate's about, trying to say there needs to be more causes. We can allow personal causes and, you know, non-natural causes into the scientific endeavor, which we used to do. You know, so
Eric,
yeah,
can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's Walter. I want to
Yes, I know that.
A couple of things that Dave brought up. The fine tuning of the universe. I remember hearing, I don't know, 30 years ago, there was maybe 20 parameters in the to take into consideration with the fine tuning of the universe. And now I think the last time I checked it out was something like 181 or something like that parameters. And I wouldn't be terribly surprised if it was increasing all the time, because there were real scientists, using empirical science, they are finding out more things. And in this discussion about the chance of things happen, I love what Stephen Meyer said about the chance. He calculated the chance of one functional protein resulting by accident is 1 chance in 10 to the 164th power. And as Dave pointed out, that there's only there's 10 to the 80th particles in the universe, and yet the chance of developing or an accidental creation of a functional protein would be 1 in 10 to the 164th power. It just boggles the mind. I mean,
you know what book, mentioning the fine-tuning argument, the book that's really good, like I said, in the middle here, The Fortunate Universe.
Yes.
Luke Barnes, he's a physicist. He has a lot of videos where he answers objections to the fine-tuning arguments. For to understand, the fine-tuning argument started in physics journals. You know, it's not some sort of Bible thing like biblical believers came up with. I mean, it was started in the physics journals. You know, and so that's where we need to understand that the physicists were the ones who were saying the universe is fine-tuned. Of course, we already believe it was designed, but I'm just saying it's amazing that the science started to come out. But yeah, so no, good point. I agree. Okay, let's see here. Who's okay? Anybody else have any comments, thoughts, or comments? Who's there? Okay, let's see here. I know we've got 26 people on here. Oh, because if you don't start talking, I'll start then asking questions again. Then I'll have to talk. So
I've got one more little question there, Eric. Your slide about you had something about logic and reason. That's one of the big focuses that Greg Bunsen used a lot of. And
I don't know which slide that is. I don't remember.
I do remember there being something. Regardless,
I don't remember that. I said that.
I think the point is we have a really good logical presentation.
I think you mean here where I talked about some people are not so much log and reason.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's where I was talking about existential arguments. Is some people are not always logic and reason dominate. I mean, they want more of an emotional need to be met, which isn't wrong. I mean, we're emotional creatures. God made us that way. But I'm just saying that some people are more bent towards looking at existential reasons for God. Most people want purpose. They want meaning. They want to know, why they're here. They have these deep existential needs. You know what I mean? And so that's what that was talking about. Now, I'm personally a both and guy. I think you can have both, so, but that's where I'm kind of coming from.
Thank you. That was really effective, though.
Thank you. What do everyone think about the revelation issue, about communication, about asking people how God should communicate? Back here when I had that slide up, seems kind of basic, but I mean, what do you think about that question? Think it's a good question to ask people?
Oh, yes. I was just studying that today, as a matter of fact, from the viewpoint that God shows in the Word that He's given to people a degree of light. And for some amount of understanding that you have, if an individual is faithful to that light he receives, God will give him more light. So you can't help but see God in nature. And when you acknowledge that you see God in nature, you may not know Him as God. I mean, some native on a far out island somewhere, like a lot farther than Vancouver Island. But you might, someone might just look at the stars and realize, how can there not be something to this? And when God brings the opportunity for that person to grow in the light, they will be receptive to it.
Right. Well, I would agree. And so, let's see, I'm looking at the, yeah. And so, okay. So, yeah, I think the revelation question is important to ask, like ask people like, well, how should God communicate to us? Because I mean, if God exists, He has to take the initiative to do something so we'll know we're there. We know He's there. And so that's what my point was. And so I ask people that, and sometimes I hear 90% of the time, or about 85% of the time, they'll say, well, why doesn't God just show me a sign? I've heard that one a lot. And you know what my response to that is? Well, what kind of sign? Well, why doesn't He like write it in the sky, or why doesn't He appear to me directly? And that there's a problem with that, because they're not really understanding who God is. Because the God of the Bible, as we know, you only know what God is like unless He reveals it, right? The God of the Bible can't be seen directly. We know that now there's some hints that He kind of appeared some ways in the Old Testament. Those are theophanies. He didn't appear in all His fullness directly to anybody, because if He did, we'd die. I mean, that's what Moses, he's telling, if no one can see me and live. So people think God is like this. I don't know what kind of God they think that they're asking for, but they assume God must appear to them directly or something. It's just, they're asking the wrong question, and they wouldn't know what God is like anyway unless He showed them, and they won't even look into that. So I do get that thing a lot, like God should show them some sort of sign. And my response is generally, there's no guarantee you would follow Him if you got your sign. You might just give Him the middle finger and walk away. You know what I mean? That's what a lot of people do. So, people assume they know how they would respond if God gave them that sign, but they really don't. They think they do. Anyway, anybody else have any other thoughts or questions? Anybody?
I've put a question on the chat box for you. Eric.
Can I say it, Ian?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So Ian says here, I thought science now says all matter, energy, space, and time, as well as natural laws had a beginning, and science only deals with these things. How can they deny the supernatural as it's the only thing left? Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that you can't, let me pull up the slide here. Again, slides are always helpful. When it comes to the universe, at that beginning point, you have, hold on a minute. I didn't share my screen, sorry. At the beginning of the universe, you have to have that beginning point. At that beginning point, that center dot there, that's when the laws of nature, that's where everything is in existence, and that's when science begins. And so that's what I've always said. I said, how can you even get science going without that? And how can you say, what caused that? Did nature cause nature? Did the laws of nature create themselves? I mean, you need a cause outside nature. And that's outside of that, the natural laws. That's exactly what I'm saying, Ian. So you're actually affirming what my point is. So, you know, people have presuppositions about things, like I said, metaphysically and philosophically. If they already believe that God is off the table, then they're not going to concede to any God explanation. You should watch a debate. There's a debate on Unbelievable, the Unbelievable broadcast. You ever watch the Unbelievable show with Justin Briley? It's on YouTube. He has Hugh Ross debating Peter Atkins. I think it's Peter Atkins. Peter Atkins, an atheist. And Peter Atkins says, I will not accept any evidence for God because no evidence, he said, because all that evidence isn't evidence. So he just writes it off to begin with. He won't even accept any evidence for God. He says, admits it. He's like, nothing would convince me. So, you know, no matter what evidence you present, sometimes they just, they won't budge an inch. Now, he's a very extreme case, but that's the way it is with some people. So, Ian, your point is well taken, and I agree 100%. You can't get science going without that beginning point. There is no science. You can't observe the natural world. You can't make inferences. You can't look at cause and effect relationships. You can't make observations. You can't do anything.
Doesn't that also handle the multi-universe idea as well? Because the multi-universe is a thing.
Yeah, well, the problem, like Dave was saying, you can't observe any multi-universes. They're not part of our. We can observe our universe, right? It's part of our observable features of reality, and science can observe that, but we can't observe any other universes because we don't have any evidence, and we can't. So it's just non-scientific. You know what I mean? You can't observe it at all. It's just speculation.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's what I think. Are you trying to say that?
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Any other thoughts or comments, questions? Good point, Ian. Anybody else? You guys are quiet tonight.
I got a question.
Yeah. Who's that?
Dessa.
Dessa, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, so I got a couple questions. So you've said that the Jews don't believe in God. Did you mean just Jesus?
I didn't say all Jews. I said that what I'm saying is yeah, let me you want to explain that?
Was it Jesus you meant?
No, they definitely don't believe in Jesus as the Messiah because they're taught from a very early age not to believe in Jesus. That's just part of Jewish identity, not to believe in Jesus. But as far as God's existence, believing in a personal God or believing in the God of Israel, the God of the Bible, I would say that many, many Jewish people I encounter do not believe in the existence of God. Now, I don't have the percentage. I would say it's higher than you might think. I have a Pew survey somewhere I can find, but you don't have to believe in God to be Jewish. You do not have to believe in God to be Jewish. You can be Jewish by ethnicity, and your mother can be Jewish, and that's all there needs to be. You do not necessarily have to believe in a personal God to have a Jewish identity. So yeah, I know it's discouraging and unbelievable, but it is true.
I mean, you got Israel, the Jews.
What's that? Yeah, I know.
Israel, the Jews, the Old Testament.
I know.
And they don't believe it?
Some of them have never looked into it. Like, for example, the community I was raised in here in Columbus, Ohio was mostly secular, meaning that they're very culturally Jewish, meaning that they raise their kids Jewish, they observe the bar mitzvahs, they go to the high holidays or something, but they don't really believe necessarily or even care whether, like, the Bible, they don't read the Bible. They just don't read it. I'm not saying every Jewish person. I'm not talking about Orthodox Jews. I'm talking about mostly what I call Reform Jews. It's part of Reform Judaism, which is like the most liberal branch of Judaism. They don't necessarily believe in the Bible. They don't really read the Bible or really think about it that much. They're just not interested. And you really only know what your parents believe. And one of my Jewish friends, their parents weren't religious or observant. And so they really don't have any convictions about it. And so when I talk to a Jewish person, I witness to them, I always ask them what they believe about God to begin with. I don't even assume they even care about the Messiah topic. You know what I mean? And so I have to kind of start from scratch. Let's see, Vi are you on the call still? Vi? Nah, she's gone. I had a Jewish person on the call, but they're gone. Vi.
I'm here.
Oh,
I'm
Vi,
here.
sorry. I said Vi. Where are you?
Yes, I agree with everything you're saying.
Yeah,
Yes.
Vi, would you agree that many Jewish people today are very secular and they don't
Oh,
believe in
for
God?
sure. For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's very common. Would you say, Vi, it's become more prevalent over the last, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years, or kind of always been around?
Yeah. No, I think it's more prevalent lately over the last 10, 20 years, really.
Yeah. So, Dessa, to answer your question, yes, a lot of them do not believe in God. And as I said, you technically do not have to believe in God to be Jewish. Is that
Right. I get it. When you said liberal, that got me. I knew. I understand.
Well, when I mean Reform Judaism, I mean, they don't, I mean, you know, Orthodox Judaism is different. They believe in God. They're much more observant. They, you know, believe the Torah. They read the Torah.
Mhm.
You know, liberal Reform Jews just don't even really, it's
I
just
know.
not even on the map. Yeah. So,
As a matter of
I get that.
fact, as a matter of fact, I met a rabbi who stated that he didn't believe in God. It's just a cultural thing.
yeah. And if you look at, I have a video where I did a discussion with a rabbi out in Portland before it went crazy. About 3 years ago, I did a discussion with a dialogue with a rabbi. He said it didn't even matter whether the Exodus really happened. I mean, you know,
What the?
isn't that
What about the-
depressing?
What?
Hey, Eric.
And yet, you know, what's really interesting, they'll turn around and say something to my husband who's like a Messianic Jew. They'll say, well, you're no longer Jewish.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't follow Judaism.
Right.
They're out of the club.
But they're still Jewish.
Right.
Yes.
You can be a Jewish atheist. Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know.
Eric,
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing. In my community, there is a female pastor who is gay, married to a witch.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Anyway, nothing
Yeah.
surprises me anymore. I'm not surprised. Okay, someone asked, what is the broadcast with Hugh Ross? I will, as I'm talking, I will find that. Give me a second. Who else has a question about something? Or comment? Anybody? I'm finding the, oops, sorry. Give me a second. Okay, I'm back. Okay, you're there. I'm going to type this in the window here, the link for the Hugh Ross event or debate. There it is. I just typed it in. Oop, I did it privately. Why did I do that? Sorry. Anybody else have any questions or anything? Comments? Someone wants to educate about string theory. No, I cannot do that in tonight. I'm not a physicist, but I can tell you that string theory is not a big threat to whether God exists or not. There's a lot of debate about the delicacies of string theory, where the strings came from and all that kinds of other stuff. But I will send out a link on that later when I send you guys the clip from tonight. Not a lot of people, I don't think I haven't seen string theory debated recently. You know, it's been a while since string theory is even brought up. But what do you guys think about talking about God's existence without using the Bible? I mean, is it even worth it? What do you think?
Oh, major.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's a real door opener.
The door opener. Okay, so here's what I say. Now, here's the thing about some of those arguments I mentioned tonight about the universe and the information theory. So let's say someone says to you, well, that doesn't really get people to the God of the Bible. I once saw a debate with Ken Ham and Richard Howe, one of my professors, philosophy professors from Southern Evangelical Seminary. They were debating over the use of natural theology arguments like we did tonight. And Ken Ham was like, well, I don't want someone just like worship God, a general God, you know, a God of nature. I want them to get to the God of the Bible because that gives them saving faith. And Richard was like, what I would say, Richard said, this is just a first step just to get them going in the direction that they need to think about God. And then you can bring up who Jesus is and go over the points of what they think about the gospel if you need to do that. So it's not really an either or. I mean, if you want to start with the gospel, start with the gospel. But if you need to start from scratch, you get that first step in and talk about God's existence, and then you can go into history and things like that. I've heard complaints about intelligent design arguments. They say intelligent design arguments only point to a designer. It doesn't really identify the designer. It's not the God of the Bible. It doesn't tell you anything. Well, it's not supposed to. All it is supposed to get you out of your atheistic views, or to think about a God. You know, if there's a God, a designer of some kind, versus just nature just does everything on its own. You know, like nature, all powerful nature exists, and it can create universes and create DNA codes and all kinds of stuff on its own, right? So I think sometimes we fail to understand that we don't need to be so worried that, you know, well, you know, it's not going to get everyone all the way to the God of the Bible. Well, it's not supposed to. It's a first step. And that's what we're doing. Step one to then step two.
Yes, Eric, this is Sheila from California.
Yeah, what part
Hi.
are you in, Sheila?
Southern Cal, Rancho Cucamonga.
I lived in San Diego.
Oh yeah, we go. I spend time in Carlsbad each year.
Okay, I lived in La Jolla. How about that?
And
by San Diego State. And by San Diego State when I went to school. But anyway, that was a long time ago, Sheila. So who cares? Go ahead.
It's all good. It's another common experience.
It's a beautiful area, though. I miss it. But go ahead.
It is very beautiful. You know, thank you so much for the presentation on being able to talk to and witness to people about the existence of God without using the Bible.
Yeah.
Because I think many times that is effective. Many people have been hurt by maybe in their past with Bible teaching or particular religious perspective. And I have found as a female, as a woman, as a mother, that I relate to human beings when it comes to their children or a newborn, and to be able to reach people in creation, like in Romans, and you mentioned Romans chapter 1, through nature, the miracle of a newborn, the miracle of a child, and
right.
Whether an individual is, whatever theist, atheist, agnostic, there is a common bond with that miracle that is before us with the newborn. And I found that to be effective. I don't know if any of the others have. I didn't hear you mention that particularly, and I just it kept coming to my heart.
Yeah, I would expand on that and say part of studying the natural world is the study of humans, absolutely. And I think that if we observe humans, of course, I have children, and I know seeing a new birth is a phenomenal experience. Changed my life forever. But I think that if we mention just humans, we're creating image likeness of God, so we can look at humans and hopefully know there is a God. We should be able to. I mean, that we are creative beings. We create things. We're moral beings. We reflect. Not only do we do terrible things because of our sin, we all know that the sin impacts us, but there's a moral aspect of us that the moral law is written in our hearts that we can do some pretty amazing things too. When suffering happens in the world, sometimes that's what brings out the best in humans. We see that the moral attributes of us come out in a new way. I mean, granted, we're still selfish and we still do terrible things, but the point is that God's imprint on us, God's moral nature, it comes out in us sometimes in a greater way. And so I think that is a way that points to a God, a being that is a moral being that's creating us in his image. Also, we're rational beings, meaning that we think. We can look at the amazing things people can do. I mean, I'm not smart enough to be a mechanical engineer or electrical engineer or whatever. That's just one of many things, nuclear physicists. But look at the things people can do with their cognitive faculties. We can do logic. We can reason. We do all kinds of things that reflect a rational mind. To believe that an impersonal force created a rational mind, such as we have, is just hard to believe, versus saying a rational mind, which is God, creates us in his image, which we are rational creatures. That makes more sense, that we're created in his image, right? And so I think that, yes, I think by looking at humans, we can see the imprint of God on us if we look closely, and that is part of the natural world. So I would agree with you. Maybe expanding on that. Does that help?
Oh, most definitely. The way you expanded on it, most definitely. Even when you touched on one point, which is when we go through hardships and how sometimes we come out better, and we can go through suffering, and then we see how we get to the other side. And many times, even if a person is not a believer, there's a cognizance of that journey, and that they went from point A, which may be devastating, it could be a health issue, and then they get to point B, which could be a healing, a restoration. And I think if when we're speaking with those unbelievers, we can help them see the arc of that experience from, say, devastation or lack to fulfillment and healing.
Right. Yeah, and I think what I'm saying also is that you know, we talk about the sin, the human depravity, like people do incredibly terrible things, as you know. But as I was saying, it seems we never talk about sometimes that people can still do amazingly good things. There are some good things people do. I mean, some amazing things, and we see that moral fiber, that moral imprint on humans. You know, they can still do some pretty incredible things, common grace, as we call it. And so, I mean, you know, we stress in sermons, you know, in biblical sermons, they always stress the man is not good. There's nothing man does is good. All have fallen short of the glory of God. Yes, I know all that. That's true. That's right. The Bible teaches that. But it doesn't mean that humans cannot do anything good. I mean,
We do
obviously,
good all the
yeah.
time.
I mean, you
I
know,
think like
yeah.
go.
Yeah, the
I
moral
wanted
law.
to share, like during disasters, like during these tornadoes and different things like that, when that us being created in God's image, where we show such grace and mercy and generosity, and even many put their lives on the line to help others. So I don't go along with where you have to just always emphasize the fallen nature. You mentioned La Jolla. La Jolla is beautiful. But
Right.
we still know that this earth, as Romans says, even the earth groans because of sin. But that does not preclude the earth from having magnificent beauty, which is still breathtaking.
Yeah, well, in Genesis, it says God created it and he said it was good, right? I mean, he didn't say it was bad,
Amen.
right? And
That's
so, you know, we obviously, yeah, we see creation is glorious, it's beautiful. I mean, we can just experiencing certain things in creation. Sometimes, you know, sometimes people believe in God just from they have this kind of like this epiphany, you know, in nature. You know, they'll just be climbing a mountain, or they'll be looking over some in nature, and they'll just be like, it clicks, like there's a God. You know, they just know there's a God. They don't need an argument for God. They just know. That's a light of creation. And then they don't know but much more about this God, but then someone comes on, shares the gospel with them, like, hey, you can know this God personally, but your sin, you know, causes you to be broken apart from him. You need to understand who Jesus is and why he came. So yeah, that's like definitely the world of nature should definitely bear witness. But we don't worship the creation like some people do, obviously.
is
Some
that
people
general
obviously,
revelation?
yeah,
Would that
that's
be
general. That's called general revelation, right? It's general because anyone can get it. But
okay?
Paul says in Romans 1 that it doesn't get through because we suppress the truth. We don't want it because we don't want to be morally accountable. And so that clear witness of creation should be clear to us, but some people obviously don't see it, and they don't receive it. They can perceive it, but they don't receive it because of sin. They want to do their own thing. They don't want to be accountable, as Paul talks about in Romans 1. They turn to idolatry, and that's just
Rebellion.
sadly, they rebel. So anyway, good points. So I appreciate your time, and I hope things are going better in California. I know it's beautiful there, but it's been challenging under Governor Newsom, as you know.
It's very challenging.
Yeah, I have a friend that lives in the northern side. I have a lot of friends that live in California, but I have a friend that lives up north. He's really been complaining to me a lot. He texts me a lot, so he's frustrated. But anyway, but I love being there. I had a lot of good memories there. I wasn't a believer then, though, so but I was seeking God at that stage of my life, so God used it. Anyway, anybody else have any other comments or thoughts, questions? What about the moral law? Does anyone agree with that? The morality issue, with people complaining about everything's fair and unjust and all that stuff, and using that as a springboard? I would think that would be a big one this day and age, wouldn't it?
Definitely. That's for sure.
Yeah, I use that one a lot. That's one of my big ones I use many occasions. Talk about that with a lot of people. So, because that really hits them every day. You know what I mean? It's like they see injustice or something. see something that they consider immoral and they want justice, they want change, right? So that's a big issue these days. But you don't need the Bible to talk about the moral law. You definitely don't need that. Anybody else? Any other questions, thoughts, comments? You guys are quiet.
You just did such a good job presenting it. We got it.
Oh, good. Okay. Good. Then we're done. No. For anyone that came late, let me mention a few things. I did mention some guest speakers we're going to have. I said that we have guest scholars come on. We have next week Daryl Bach coming back to talk about his new book, Cultural Intelligence. He's going to talk about why he wrote that book and why it's important, because if you remember, and he was on 2 months ago, he said he doesn't think Christians have a clue on how to engage culture. So that's why he wrote the book, Cultural Intelligence. But it comes out next Tuesday. The book comes out next Tuesday. And ironically, he's going to be on with us the day it gets released. So he'll be back with us. He's a professor of New Testament at Dallas Theological Seminary. He's written a ton of books, very prolific author. He loves doing these kinds of calls, so he'll be back. And then I said we're going to have Robert Bowman on. Robert Bowman is another apologist who has specialized in cults and the deity of Jesus. He's going to talk about his book, Joseph's Visions and Jesus' Resurrection, where he talks about the Mormon claim that Joseph Smith had these visions. They're kind of like equivalent to what we believe about the resurrection, some of those problems with that. I may have him lecture on some other things, but he's going to be with us. He is a brilliant guy. If you look up his website, Robert Bowman, really, he's a really well-known guy. And then check this out. The last week of September, I'm going to have Michael Brown back. Does everyone know who Dr. Michael Brown is? The Messianic Jewish apologist.
Oh, yes.
And he and I are going to do a little role play. I'm going to play devil's advocate and challenge Michael with Jewish objections to Jesus. He's written 5 books called Answering Jewish Objections. And I'm going to go ahead and throw him the objections to Jesus from the Jewish community, some of the ones that I've heard and I'm familiar with and have answered. But I'm going to kind of be like, I'm going to play a little bit as devil's advocate, then I'd have some fun. He's agreed to go along with it. So we're going to do that. And so we've got some guests coming up, and I think it'll be really good, but to mix it up a bit. So be thinking about questions you have about culture and some things you want to ask Dr. Bach about, like what are some cultural issues that you think Christians are not engaging? Maybe we're not dealing with them in the churches. Maybe we're not mentioning them. Maybe they're things you're hearing from your children or peers or coworkers that, you say, hey, I really want to tackle that topic, but I'm afraid to. I don't know how to approach it. Maybe you want to ask them what Christians should do with politics. That's a big, big debate question these days. I'm going to bring it up with them. Not that we're going to take a position. The point is that how do we engage each other in a respectful way when we disagree? Because not everybody agrees, believers, on how to, engage the political realm. And now we're up to another election coming up, as you know, and we're heavily debating each other. There's a lot of debates going on, whether good or bad. It's a whole other story. So, just be thinking about some of the questions for him. But he's a good guy and he loves being here. I want to mention one thing here. There is a book. I'll go ahead and type it in the chat room. A book that I wrote on God's existence. It's really cheap. Does anyone here use Kindle?
Yep.
Who uses? Yeah, if you use Kindle, here, I'll look it up right here. Here it is. If you want a really cheap intro on God's existence, it's only 80 pages. I wrote this little book here with my friend. It's only 80 pages. It's called Does God Exist? Why It Matters. And it's like $2.99 on Kindle. I think you'll find enough in there. It's a good book to hand to somebody, or else a good book for yourself. It's only 80 pages. People don't read much these days. I read, but maybe you read, but some people don't. So it's only 80 pages, but you can get that. That's a really good, I think just as an intro, that's why we wrote it, to get people thinking about the God question. I think the way it's laid out is very helpful. Obviously, we wrote it, so I'm going to be biased. I admit it. So, you can check that out if you want to look at God's existence. But there's a whole lot of books out there. Anybody else have any other questions? Oh, one last thing I want to say. When people don't think the God question is relevant, one thing you may want to say to them also, a good question, is this. If Christianity is true, would you be a Christian? Or if Jesus really is the Son of God, would you follow him? Put it back on them. Make them answer the question, what really is going on there. Because as soon as they answer, you know how serious they are about the pursuit of truth, right? You'll know right away. They say, well, yeah, if it's true, yeah, I'd follow. Well, no, not really. I really don't care. You know what I mean? Get them to come out with it, what their issues are. That's what I do. Anybody else? Someone else wrote something here. I need information on modalism. Yeah, I can give you a resource on that. Who wrote that? I can't see here. Oh, Sheila. Oh, sorry, that's to me privately. Okay. Sheila, do I have your email? Can you type it in there on the bottom? For anyone that's new tonight, type your emails in so I can put you on the list. And I'll send something to you with your question there. Sheila, do you hear me? Not hearing anything. Okay.
Yes, yes, I do.
Yeah, can
And
you
I'll
type
put
in? Yeah, type your email there on the chat room. I'll go ahead
Okay,
and I can send you something. If there's anybody new here tonight, the first time callers, you need to, if you want to put your email list in the chat, I can add you to the list. That way you are on all the Zoom call emails and all the information and everything. Anybody else want to talk about anything? Any other questions or comments? Anybody? Guys are just filled with energy tonight.
Well, this
Okay,
is
someone wrote, where's the book I wrote? The book I wrote is right there in the chat room. It's right above. I posted it. Did I post it privately? I did do it privately. Darn it. I did it again. I did not do it to everyone. I'm sorry. Give me a second. It's hard to do that sometimes, to put everyone. Give me a second. Everyone. There we go. Okay. I'll post it right here. Okay. I'm posting it right now. There is the link. There you go. Sorry about that. No, I did it again. Someone keeps emailing me privately and then I have to change it again. Okay, let's do it again to everyone. Please, nobody type it. Okay, here we go. There's the link to everyone. There's my book. Okay, yeah, Sheila posted it too. Okay. All right. Nobody wants to talk about anything. Anything else? Guys are so quiet tonight. Okay, well, then no one else wants to talk about anything. I will send out the clip later. You guys can study it if you want any more, and I'll send out the PowerPoint or the PDF, and you guys can make sure you get some of those books I posted on there. They're very helpful if you want to go deeper on the topics. Anyway, I guess nobody else wants to say anything. I guess I'll just pray us out. Going once, going twice. Anybody? Going 3 times. Any last comments, questions? Okay, let's get ready for Daryl Bach next week. All right, let's pray. Lord, we just thank you for this time and thank you for this meeting. I pray, Lord God, you just bless each person here tonight. And I pray, Lord God, that strength and everything.